Wounds, wisdom, and the word. Wounds, wisdom, and the word. Now here are your hosts, Jamie and Doug.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to yet another episode of Wounds, Wisdom, and the Word with myself, Jamie Shepherd, and my compadre, Doug Gregory.
Hola.
I'm not going to try to point at him because I have no idea where he is on the screen, and I would just look dumb if I did that. So we're going to refrain from that, right? That way, this way, we have no idea. So I don't want to look like I'm picking his nose either, because if my hand goes too far, we could be dealing with that. So, I mean, you know, Trevor Lawrence, he made a whole episode of that himself at the ball game the other night for you football fans. Okay, sorry. Squirrel. Anyway, today, title of today's episode, why do I do that? Right? I can't speak for Doug, but I can tell you I've asked myself that question many times. And, you know, it's interesting because we do things in our lives a lot of times without even thinking about it. It's just either how we've always done it, it's how we were taught to do it, or it's the only way we know how to do it, right? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story to kind of introduce our subject matter for today. And I'm wearing my apron for the occasion, right? So this is a cooking story. And you know, we're getting close to the holidays, the turkey season, ham season, and anything else you happen to like to eat for Christmas and Thanksgiving. So there was a young daughter and a mom in the kitchen cooking a ham one day. And mom took her knife and she lopped off the end of the ham and, you know, put it in the bag or whatever she did, put it in the pan, and in the oven it went, right? So little girl, being just at that right age to be real curious about things, she's like, Mom, why'd you cut the end of the ham off? Mom says, well, that's just how Grandma taught me to do it, right? And, you know, kiddo says, well, why does Grandma do it that way? She said, honestly, honey, I don't know. Maybe next time we see her, we can ask her. So next time they're visiting at Grandma's, you know, little girl says, hey, Grandma, why do you cut the end of the ham off? And she kind of looks at her mom and, you know, Mom tells Grandma the story and explains that, you know, it's how she was taught. And she said, well, you know, interestingly enough, that's just how my mama taught me to do it. Well, as it happens, great grandmother is still alive. So a little while later, all three of them go visit great grandmother. And Grandma says, hey, Mom, why do we cut the end of the ham off when we, you know, what does that do? What purpose does that serve? And great grandmother says, well, I don't know. I just never had a pan big enough. So basically, you've got 3 generations that have been cutting the end of the ham off with only one generation really understanding why they did it. It's interesting how that evolves into just how we do it. It's just how I was taught to do it, right? So the term for that's generational trauma, also known as transgenerational trauma or intergenerational trauma. And these can be things that start very small and insignificant, and maybe they remain that way, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Doug, cutting the end of a ham off, is that harming anybody?
Well, I mean, it's like 30 years of wasted ham. I don't know.
Right. You know, the ham might be a little offended by it, but otherwise it's not really hurting anybody, right? Now, the thing about why those daughters did the cooking of the ham the way that they did, it kind of goes back to programming, right? And Doug's actually going to talk to us a little bit about this because he happens to know a thing or two about it. But if I wanted Doug to write a program for me to do a particular thing, right? Make this picture of a rainbow and make it pop up on my computer screen every so many seconds, well, he could probably do that. But the thing is, my computer is not going to do that unless it's programmed to do it. Right, Doug?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of laptop you've got, computer, they've all basically got within a few options the same stuff inside of them. So I'm going to date myself here. I graduated high school in 2001. Okay. And I'm really going to sound like an old fogey. Now if you want to program, you can just ask AI and it'll write it for you. But in my day and time, back in my day, if you wanted a computer program, you had to write it yourself.
Did you also walk uphill to school?
No, I drove an S10 most of the time. But got some funny stories about that too. But we'll digress. But I remember when I went to Tennessee Tech, graduated in 05. Yeah. So my senior year, all your finals was all computer programming classes, different languages, different stuff, concepts. But you didn't have tests; you had programs that you had to turn in, and it was a big deal. I mean, everything was due, and I don't remember exactly what the program was, but it was due the next day at 2 o'clock, and I had done all the work. I'd put it together, but like night before, I cannot make this program work. It just will not. And I'm thrashing. I'm testing and debugging and trying to get all this stuff, and rewrote even portions of it. And finally, about 2 in the morning, I'm like, I gotta quit. There's a lot of wisdom in life of knowing when to quit. And I didn't have.
Amen to that.
I should have quit a long time before I did, but I went to bed that night, and I think I programmed all night in my sleep, in my dreams. It's just like it just didn't quit. But I literally woke up the next morning, probably too late, and a couple hours before class, and I sat down at my computer, and fire this thing up, and and I literally had a comma in the wrong place. I moved this comma, and it goes swoop, and I'm like, yeah. And now I had to go back and do like an hour and a half worth of work to undo all. I had it right to start with, just had a comma in the wrong place. It was doing just exactly what I told it to do, and I did not tell it how to do it correctly, and therefore it didn't. A computer can't change its programming. It will run within the bounds that we give it, and we're the same. We're the same way. I mean, yeah, it's kind of I guess it's irrelated, maybe not, but like in the book of Job, when Satan goes in and before God and says, all these people just serve you because you give them stuff. God drew the boundary box on Satan. You can only do this, and he couldn't go beyond it. And, programming works that way. And I never realized until more recently in a conversation with Jamie, but like this idea of programming goes along with people as well. Mm-hmm. When we're a child, you don't know. You don't know, if you've got a Leave It to Beaver family, you think that's the way every family is. If you've got a family that is horrendous or atrocious, you don't know what another family looks like, maybe until you get in your teenage years and you go to a sleepover and you're like, people live like this? Yeah. So I'll let Jamie talk about that a little bit, about this idea of programming and how it develops in our childhood.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's two basic ways that we learn as children. It's what we're taught, right? But also what is modeled for us. And 90% of that comes from our families. Now, the other 10%, well, that's made up of school and maybe even church and, you know, friends, right? So think other systems, right? Your core family system is what's largely responsible for programming you or teaching you, right? And keep in mind, when I use the word teach, it ain't that these parents are sitting down with their kids going, okay, here's what you're supposed to do, here's what you're not supposed to do. I mean, that happens, but only in those, leave it to beaver families, as you call them. More often than not, it's those kids watching what mom and dad are doing, as well as what they're not doing, right? Now, there is a second type of learning, and that is what's called crucible learning, right? Now, Doug, you do a little bit of metal work, right? You could probably tell us what a crucible is. But it's basically this very pressurized situation, right? In which a metal is formed into something. Okay. And keep in mind, this is not only high pressure, but it's high heat, right? Because golly, what does metal have to be at to melt, Doug? You'd know that a lot quicker than
Well,
I would.
depending on what you're doing,
Type of
like
metal, right?
when I'm, a ferric metal, which means it's a magnet will stick to it. If you're making a knife, you've got to get the knife up over basically the temperature where it goes non-magnetic, and that's somewhere around 1500 degrees.
Yeah,
Um,
that's not cool, right? That's
no, that
that's
will
that's hotter than it.
absolutely burn the snot off of you. Like,
Oh yeah, and probably a couple layers of skin to go with it, right? So when we talk about crucible learning, it's basically a family that presents a very high pressure, high intensity system. And a lot of times that comes from families where there is a disabled member or a handicapped member, right? So that also can happen in single parent homes. So divorced or split homes. Like, also, even if a family is at a certain place in the socioeconomic status, right? That could also be considered a crucible learning
struggling to
situation.
survive.
Absolutely, right? So those are what you would call an extreme case, but they happen more often than you know. All that to say, these situations are what programs the children. It's what teaches the children who to be, how to be, what to do, how to act. And it's not always the best environment. There are children out there who grow up to be adults who have simply had to learn, or they've made it through life learning how to to survive, right? And that's actually something we are probably going to talk about in a little bit in a future episode about, surviving versus thriving. So, when what's interesting is there are some pretty good examples of these, generational traumas and this programming, even in the Bible, right? Specifically, Doug, what comes to mind for me is like the children of Israel in the wilderness,
Yeah.
right? You've got this massive group of people who have traveled this long distance wanting to go into this land that God has promised them. They get there and they act stupid because that's just what we honestly came to expect of the children of Israel from the Old Testament, because there is story after story after story, right? All that to say, they ruined the opportunity to go in through unbelief and a lack of faith, right? And God basically said, hey, look, if y'all are going to be stupid, then you're going to live stupid, right? And so I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to make all of you people walk around down here in the wilderness long enough for an entire generation of people to die, except for two people. We know them as Joshua and Caleb, right? So the children of that generation, while they did not die in the wilderness, do you honestly believe that they wandered around out there all of that time with their parents and they didn't learn anything? Or they didn't change the way that they did life at least a little bit based off of that experience?
You think
Oh,
about how
I'm
much death
sure.
they saw.
Absolutely. I mean, they're burying their parents along with the parents of their friends and their other friends. And, you know, I feel like they probably saw that maybe even on a daily basis during that 40-year span. So to believe that that generation, right, the second one, went through that experience and changed, it's just crazy. Like, not to believe that. I mean, you think about even here in the United States, you have the baby boomers, right? That's an entire generation of people that were born post-war. But even going back further than that, how about the generation of people that lived through the Great Depression? Do you think that the descendants of those families, they were either real big spenders or penny pinchers? There probably wasn't a whole lot of in between until you got further down into the generations because of what they had to, how they had to live.
I think a lot of what you see in our world today, we hadn't talked about this before, but I have a theory. Throw it in the trash. But
Love
like
theories.
a lot of what you see today, my emotion becomes my truth. You know, how I want to be identified and how I feel, and if I think I'm this or that, or it's like everybody gets to have their own truth. Well, I could see that if you think about things swinging on a pendulum. Okay, I would surmise that during the Great Depression, okay, we're trying to survive. We're trying to scratch out a living. We're trying to like not die. And, time to sit around and talk about our feelings. Okay. Probably didn't have a lot of that because, quit crying. We got to try not to die today. You know, that generation raises a generation where, oh, hey, the Nazis and Pearl Harbor and, we've got to go defeat the enemy. Okay. And then I know my grandfather was a World War II veteran on my mother's side, come back and never uttered a word about it to them, or hardly to anybody. So, you got a generation that raised a generation. We call them the greatest generation, uh, maybe rightfully so for what they were able to accomplish. But like, I know enough about human beings to know that coming back and just acting like it never happens
Don't happen.
They raise a generation. Okay. And, they're dealing with the way their parents do things. So you've got no emotion, and all of a sudden it starts to shift. And one of the things you see in a lot of millennials, and, we're painting with broad brushes here. You can't,
Oh, yeah.
but a lot of times millennials, the parents of millennials, the idea of the helicopter parent comes from almost this. You see every generation almost saying, well, I'm not going to do it like my parents did it. So you can see a swing from no emotions, don't you talk about it, don't you cry, don't you nothing, to now everything's about my emotion and my truth. Because every generation comes along and says, we're not going to do it like they did it. We're gonna go a little more this way. And I think probably you'll see it swing back. Uh, I could see how that could come to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because even in recent weeks with what happened with Charlie Kirk, right?
There's a shift.
Yeah, that generation of young people, like I think the reason that he had such a wide influence is because he didn't necessarily speak about emotion alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a a lot of logic in what he presented to people.
Yeah.
And there were a number of young people that grabbed onto that because they were hungry for logic and
Something
truth.
different.
Bingo. Yep.
Yeah. And, I think one of the biggest challenges that the church has and family has, and, is how the generations interact with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, there is wisdom here that needs to be passed down, but it's not always just one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things that can be learned, the other way around. Thinking about some verses, you referenced the story of the children of Israel, that's Numbers 32, 10 through 13. But we were talking about this earlier, and one of the things that come to my mind was Ezekiel 18:20. I deal with this verse a lot because there's this idea in a lot of false doctrines in the world that sin is passed down generation to generation. Uh, Ezekiel 18:20, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father. The word iniquity there means to have the habit of sinning continuously. So somebody who has a habit of sinning. They may know that they're sinning or they may not. It's saying that
Right.
they sin constantly. Nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness uh, of the wicked shall be upon himself. So sin doesn't transfer. Now,
Mm-hmm.
do we live in a fallen world? Are people going to grow up and become sinners? Sure, but they're not born that
Oh,
way.
yeah.
Romans 3:23. All will, but they're not born that way. Uh, but then, okay, sin doesn't transfer between generations, but influence does. Programming does.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this is Ephesians 6:4. And it's interesting. You don't have this for mothers, even though I think it applies to mothers. But I'd say it's a bigger challenge for fathers. That's why, God knows. Um, there's so many things where, when he says something to a man or woman, it doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily apply the other way. He's telling you this is what you need to look out for because I know you, I made you. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger or wrath, as some translation would say, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Why do you think God would say, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger or wrath? I mean, the Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, a lot of things. But I think the reason for that is because it's really easy for dads in the positions that they are in. Not that God didn't make them loving and not that God didn't give them hearts and all this stuff, but dad usually takes on the disciplinarian role a lot of
Disciplinarian.
times.
Mm-hmm.
Not that
A
mama
lot
doesn't
of times.
discipline, but when mama calls in the special forces, she calls in dad.
She
You know,
does.
the
Yep.
buck's going to stop. You know,
Yep.
there's been a few times where that scene where the little baby lions are picking at the daddy lion and biting and nipping his
Mm-hmm.
ears and stuff, and finally he's had enough and he gets up, and just, wow, I've had a few of those moments. Like,
Yeah.
come on, bring it.
Uh-huh.
Because it stops with me. Uh,
Yep.
and those may be instances, one-off instances, but like if dad is carrying around a heart full of hurt
Yeah.
and pain and all this stuff, if he was programmed by his upbringing, heard a story the other night, and I can't even begin to tell you how heartbreaking it was to hear what this father done to his son.
Mm.
And he said, I didn't know my father loved me until I was 42 years old. I was getting carried off in handcuffs for like the second or third time. And my dad was sitting there crying. And he looked up across the courtroom and said, I love you, son.
Mm.
And he said, I didn't know how to feel about that because I never had been told. He never said, he never acted, he never. And, one of the things I said in that moment was, it's not that it justifies what your father did at all, but Where did he learn those things? What was his father like? It's just,
Well, and to kind of add to your analyzation of that verse, I think the other, maybe a part of that too, God calls fathers, or specifically in that verse calls out fathers, because he has appointed them to be the spiritual and the leader, or the spiritual leader and just leader in general of the home. If dad's not setting a good example, then what else can you really expect from that family? And, kind of tying it in with that story, like if that man's father grew up with a father who did not show emotion or did not show support, it's
beating.
real likely that his father was the same way, right? Or maybe he didn't have one, because that's the other thing you run into a whole lot is, children growing up in one or the other, right? The home of mom or dad, and very little interaction from the other parent. Well, you take a little boy growing up in a home with only mama, do you think he's really going to know how to be a dad? No.
Not because it's mama's fault. I mean,
Exactly.
and don't get us wrong. Like, some people may listen to this and think, well, they think, listen,
Oh, Lord, no.
just because a lot of people mess this up doesn't mean God wasn't right in the way he designed it. Right. I mean, you can take a hammer and
Well, and
build a
I
house, and
also
you can take
would,
a hammer and kill somebody. I mean, it's not the
yep.
hammer's fault.
Well, and I would not ever want anybody to hear what I just said and think, oh, well, I'm messing my kid up because, mom or dad are gone. Maybe they've passed away or deceased. It's not that, right? This kind of goes back into the modeling, right? If you've got a two-parent home and you've got two girls or two boys, or you've got a boy and a girl, they're going to get both pictures of what a dad should be and what a mom should be, right?
Yeah.
That's all I am stating. It's not that your child is automatically going to be less than because parent is missing. It's more
But
about
if the father
understanding
figure,
the role.
yeah, if the father figure's not there, then that male role model modeling is going to have to come from somewhere else, like a church
Exactly.
family, like,
Yeah.
an uncle or a cousin or, I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Grandpa. Mm-hmm.
yeah, grandpa, somebody is going, because, I mean, you think about, okay, you look at Ephesians 5:33, okay, and uh, I did this before. Like, I think Genesis 2:24, man shall leave father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and Ephesians 5:33 go together. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you've got this idea of, you know, child's going to grow up, they're going to leave home, they're going to come out of their family unit, and even though they're not related, they don't talk to mom and daddy, whatever, but they're not in the same house, they're not on the same roof anymore. Okay, they go off, they get married. Okay, and like, this idea of love and respect is, a woman needs to see a mother loving the husband.
Mm-hmm.
A lady needs to see a husband loving the mother, right? She needs to see those pictures, and the son needs the same thing. The son needs to see how a man operates, and he needs to see what a woman that loves a man does. I mean, it's kind of, it's just the way God designed the system to work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, uh, like I say, just because a lot of people mess it up doesn't mean his design's bad.
No. In my personal and professional opinion, God's design is perfect, right? It is the humanness that all of us bring to it that can make it extremely messy sometimes. And honestly, messy exists in two parent households as well.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Because, I mean, you
So,
know,
oh,
you're
go
not
ahead.
perfect. I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
you're not two perfect people. You're never going to be two perfect people. And I heard one time Jerry Barber may be one of the best ones about all this. Like, he talked about when his kids got old enough to have a cell phone or drive a car. Like, he would sit down and sign a contract with his children. Like if you get in a wreck, you're going to be responsible for half of the whatever. And you know, like just kind of, I'm going to lay out my expectations ahead of time. And one of the things he talked about doing is when they got ready to move out, they kind of had a party and, you know, went somewhere and made a big deal out of this. But like, you know, basically sit down and told them, listen, for 18, 20, how many ever years of your life, we've tried our best to raise you and do the best we could by you, you know, and basically, is there anything that you feel like that we did wrong where we need to, you know, beg your forgiveness and all this, and, you know, like basically speak now or forever hold your peace kind of deal.
Yeah.
And when they got done, you know, it's kind of like, okay, now you don't get to sit here and, you know, blame us for whatever happened in your life. You know, we tried to do the best we could by you, and anywhere we messed up, we're sorry. You just have to forgive us. But like, that's your time to shine, you know. And not that they didn't help their kids or support them after that, but he made a very clear delineation, you know, between you are now your own person, and you got to go fly.
Well, and I love that they gave their children the opportunity for that feedback, but they were also willing to offer the apology and the, yeah, we could have done that better speech, because golly, Doug, I can't tell you how many people I've run across who need that.
Right.
And sometimes we can get hung up on that, right? Would it be nice for all parents to look at their kids and go, you know what, I know I messed that up. Like, I just completely stuck my foot in the mud on that one.
Yeah.
And I'm real sorry about that, right? And there are some parents who will. Absolutely. You know, I've had clients come back and go, oh my gosh, my mom apologized. Oh my gosh, my dad apologized. Or like, I had this conversation that I never thought I would ever, you know. And then I have some people who look at me and go, I could never have that conversation with my parents.
Yeah.
Okay, then don't. But you've got to decide right now how necessary that apology from them is, right? That's where you get to begin changing the programming. Because in that moment, you are kind of declaring yourself separate and apart from your parents.
Yep.
That is a huge, huge, important step in change. You know, and people have a hard time with it. I mean, even that story that I started off with about cooking the ham, right? There are some women out there who would continue cutting the end off that ham. Why?
Yeah.
Why? You now know that it has absolutely
right.
nothing to do. Yeah, it feels right, right? It feels like this is what it's what I'm supposed to do. It's what I was taught to do. It's what I was told to do. For real? If you were taught to run your fingers through a meat grinder, would you do that over and over again? You know, I mean, that's a pretty far example, and sorry if I, you know, shocked anybody with that, gave them a bad image, but it's an extreme example, but it is still just as applicable.
Well, but you can take, and this may be a little advanced for all this, but if anybody's listening, okay, go look up a genogram and how to do a genogram.
Yeah. I do those in session quite often.
You know, you take somebody that's an alcoholic and ask them to do a genogram, what you're probably going to find is uncle or daddy was an alcoholic, and it may go back generations.
Granddaddy.
I mean, like it
does in my family.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, one of the things, a computer cannot change its programming on its own. We may be headed there in in a few years, but right now, you know, Skynet can't get us.
That is a valid statement, Doug. That's what we're going with.
I'll be back.
Right.
But a computer can't change its programming, but we can. there's this concept of neuroplasticity, and I'll let Jamie can speak more in depth and detail to it. But this idea of your brain learns to do things in routine. You learn to tie your shoes, and when you need to tie your shoes, your brain just says hit play on that. It doesn't think about how to do that. It just runs the commands. And a lot of times the things cutting the end of the ham off is one of those routines. It's a rut, but like, it does not mean you have to stay stuck in it forever. You have the ability to change. Will it be hard? Yes. Is it possible? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the one word, like, and you kind of mentioned this, right? It's, learning to tie your shoe. It's doing that over and over again. Repetition, right? Repetition. I do not remember where this piece of information came from, but I remember hearing or reading this little pro tip, we'll call it. If you want to remember something, say it 3 times, right? 3 times. I can't tell you how many times I've utilized that before I go to bed. If I got a load of laundry in the wash that needs to be in the dryer first thing in the morning, I will lay in there in my bed before I say my prayer, and I will repeat to myself, move the clothes, put the clothes in the dryer, move the clothes, right, 3 times, however I word it. Do you know what my brain just seems to automatically bring back up to me the minute I wake up and put my feet on the floor? Hey, those clothes are in the dryer. You need to go move them. Okay. Now, I can't promise you or give you any kind of scientific evidence that that is a true thing to do, but it works for me. But when you talk about neuroplasticity, repetition goes hand in hand with that. And here's why. So your brain is not a solid thing. It's not, right? It is ever changing, ever evolving. And it cycles and it learns and it forgets and it relearns. Okay. But the way that you think about ruts, as you call them, or habits, routines, it's like walking through a field, a real tall grass field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody has walked through that field before you, we'll say an hour before you may or may not be able to tell where they walked. But if 100 people walked through that field before you did, do you think you're going to be able to tell where they all walked if they all took the same path? Yeah. Because that grass is going to be laid down, right? In other words, they are wearing a path in that. That's exactly how our brain works when we are attempting change. The old pathway, if we abandon it, guess what happens? Grows up, just like in a grass field, right? If you happen to be the type that's an avid hiker, and maybe you go to some of the state parks, well, those hiking trails are set up and they are well established for a reason. They're safe. They're familiar. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people have traveled them before, right? It's a well-known path. And there's safety, perceived safety there, right? It don't mean that I'm not going to be bumbling through there and trip on a log and break my leg because I'm clumsy. But it means that 99 other people are going to walk through there and not do that. All that to say, old neural pathways are comfortable. Not because they're healthy, not because they are functional, but simply because they are familiar. We've always cut the end of this ham off. Why wouldn't I do it now? Well, because now it doesn't make sense. Right? This kind of touches back on that surviving thing.
Yeah.
If I have been in a tough situation growing up and I've had to just survive through it, well, I've got neural pathways in my brain.
Yep.
But when I grow up and I'm able to claim independence from that family and from those patterns, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to try to repeat them because I don't know any different. That's my programming. Well, then when relationship after relationship starts failing, I might go, oh, okay, something's up. I wish more people would do that after only 1 or 2 failed relationships. Sorry, that's a joke, a bad one.
At some point, it's me.
Thank you. Like glaringly obvious at some point, but at some point, it's me. At some point, I have to go, you know what? What I have been doing, it ain't working.
Yeah.
It ain't working. And I can't go back and put the end of the ham back on. Right? But I can not cut it off the next time I make a ham. I can make
2 pieces of bread.
That's right. Be eating that first slice. But I can choose to do it differently the next time I make a ham. I can choose not to cut the end of that off. And, sometimes people get real hung up on, well, am I violating the memory of my great aunt so-and-so or great grandma Gussie over there who, just thought really?
Traditions are peer pressure from people who are dead.
Absolutely. And this is going to sound real, real cold when I say it. Okay? Disclaimer. But they're dead. They don't care if you're cutting the end of a flipping ham off or not. They are gone. But you are not.
Yeah.
So stop holding on to something that's not good for you anymore. And that serves no purpose in your life simply because you think you're supposed to. Like, I think it's completely okay, Doug, for people to ask the question, why do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
If you can answer it with a logical and reasonable and rational answer, then keep it. But if it starts with, well, but Mama said, or if it starts with, or if it starts with, well, that's how Daddy always did it. Stop. Just stop yourself right there. Okay?
Survey says.
Yes. We need we need sound effects, Doug. That's that's our next upgrade. But yeah.
Yes. One of the things too about this that kind of relates to what you were talking about, saying it to yourself 3 times, and the problem a lot of times with these ruts or routines or whatever you call them is they can fire so quickly. This is kind of unrelated, but like, with ADHD people, and I heard this one time, I don't have the science to back it up, but it makes a ton of sense that you have to have a thought for X number of seconds for it to be stored in your short-term memory, and the perfect example is one of the things you find a lot of times with executive function disorders is you lose stuff. Where'd I lay the keys? Because when you're running through your day, I lost a set of keys one time for 3 months, and that was anyway. But I don't think I put them under the fender cover that they were in the shop. But anyway, I digress. I'll never be able to prove that this side of eternity. But like you can, when you're doing something, and like I'll set them on the counter there, like you can do that and have that thought so quickly that you don't remember it. It's not that you're an idiot. It's just your brain can kind of that quick. And a lot of times, part of the process of breaking the rut is just stopping and slowing down. And you feel the trigger. Oh, wait a minute, back up. I don't want to go down that path. A lot of times, Pavlov did the experiment with the dogs, right? Where
operant conditioning.
He would ring the bell and feed them and ring the bell, and could make them slobber themselves stupid, just by ringing a bell, and never even had to feed them. They just were so conditioned. A lot of times the way you start to break that cycle is understanding, even if it takes you a little while to stop going down the pathway, when you can start to slow down and say, I'm triggered, I'm going down the pathway, and
yes,
I'm trying to hit the brakes, but maybe I can't this time. But when you can start to just break that automatic, just hit play, and your brain goes and does whatever. That's a big win.
Well, and it's interesting to watch people who are sitting in front of me when they have genuinely have no idea that there is another option to this thing that they're doing, or this pattern of behavior, right? And I'll look at them and I'll be like, well, why do you do that? Or, well, why did you make that choice? That's like the word choice. It just blows them up, because they're like, wait a minute, I have one? Like, yeah. Excellent book suggestion.
Go ahead.
Real quick, excellent book suggestion. If anybody is interested in kind of discovering this for themselves, it's called I Never Knew I Had a Choice. I think the author is Corey, Corey. Can't remember the first name, but yeah, very eye-opening book.
Well, and to kind of use the ham illustration, it may be a deal where you feel so compelled to cut the end of the ham off that you have to ask somebody, hey, we're going to cook ham tonight, and about 4:30, I need you to come through here and just take all the knives. Go lock them up out in the garage somewhere, and I'm gonna be looking for a knife for 5 minutes, but when I can't cut it off, then I'm gonna put it in this thing, and it's gonna feel so foreign and hateful and just
yes.
But then I'm gonna bake it, and it's gonna be fine. I'm gonna be glad, what I'm saying. Like sometimes it just, I think a lot of times, that's kind of the idea behind cognitive behavioral therapy, is you kind of act your way into a new kind of thinking. And it may take.
And honestly, Doug, sometimes it's the purpose behind talk therapy in general. It's just having somebody across from you that you view as a professional and or expert, and them looking at you going, you don't have to cut the end of that ham off. Or what would happen if you didn't cut the end of the ham off?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
just having that voice of reason. Yep. Perspective.
Yeah. I've said a lot of times that the best thing that a counselor can do for you is give you another perspective. Of course you do it this way. That's the only way you know to do it. It's just like, why can't I do it any different? Well, if you know how to do any better, you would do it. It's kind of like, it's a lot of times in these cases, it's not that you have a better tool and you refuse to use it. You're just standing in a shop full of tools and you think all I got's a hammer. No, baby, you got all kinds of tools. You just don't realize it. The gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you kind of talk about all those, the tools in the tool shed, because I think that may be what we're going to talk about next time is, we talked about the ability to change, right? Meaning we can rewrite that programming, and our brains are more than happy to help us do it. Now, maybe the question is, well, how do I do it? And, we're going to talk a little bit next time about how do you build your toolbox.
I love tools. They're so awesome.
Mm-hmm. I know how to use a screwdriver, a hammer, and a pair of pliers efficiently. And a drill, just not with a glove. There's a whole story behind that crooked little finger. So.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Well, all right. Well, thank you for listening and hanging out with us and putting up with all my crude ham jokes. Until next time, God bless. We love you.
Peace.